Dear students, welcome to the lecture on discourse, power and ideologies in language use. This is the first introductory lecture in the course English 7. Language is our base for communication, and embedded in how we use language are implicit assumptions about the world. This means that our world view is expressed in language, how we use language. Our world view are things like, what is the nature of knowledge? What is true and what is false? How do we look upon concepts such as objective or subjective knowledge? And how do we value fact compared to experience? It centers on the concept of what is truth. If you assume that the world exists independently of man, that implies that two individuals can observe the world in the same objective way. Hence, there is true objective knowledge. It means that if we see a red ball, we will both see a red ball. And there will be no argument about what we have seen, basically. If you assume that the world as we see it is dependent on man, then it follows that knowledge is not objective but influenced by personal experience and social conventions. And truth becomes relative. And when truth becomes relative, power relations becomes important. If you think about the world and facts as objective, that means that truth can be absolute, meaning something is either true or false. There is no grey scale here, no in between when you talk about truth as absolute. But if you think about the world as a subjective reality, then truth becomes relative. It means that when you have good reason for saying something, it becomes true. And this kind of truth is dependent on the situation. Now, who is right? Who decides what is right or wrong, true or false? Who decides whether it should be objective or subjective truth? This is when the idea of power becomes important. So, who has the power to decide what is true and false and what is right and wrong? Can affect our lives, if nothing else. Which leads us then to the concept of power and what power is. One person who is very important for the concept of power, a modern philosopher, is Foucault. He talks about freedom, the personal freedom, which also means that we start to discipline ourselves. So in the concept of freedom, there is the idea of discipline. If you have power from society and absolute power, you don't have to have your own discipline. If you have freedom, you need to discipline yourself. Foucault is also crucial when it comes to the concept of discourse. I'll come to this in a little bit again, and how power is expressed via language. In his ideas, you also have the thought that there is no power without resistance, and that these two things are mutually dependent concepts. Which leads us to the concept of ideology. So what is ideology? Ideology is the systematic body of concepts, especially about human life or culture, or it can be defined as a manner or the content of thinking characteristic of an individual, group, or culture, or the integrated assertions, theories, and aims that constitute a social or political program. To express this in a more matter-of-fact way, ideology is embedded in beliefs, values, and opinions we have. This is usually coded and cloaked, which means hidden, and it also makes ideologies very hard to spot. Ideology is often presented as common sense. It's something we find natural, universal. It's based on emotions rather than logic and debate. And it is implicated in the arrangements of power in society. Ideology can also be expressed via symbols and narratives. Narrative is stories, language, but they can be in the manner of film, or of text, or of stories, or of a computer game. These are all narratives. Examples of ideologies are all religions and political ideologies such as liberalism, socialism, etc. There are more. And we come to the concept of discourse. So what is discourse? Well, discourse can be defined as communication of thought by words, talk, conversation, or it can be a formal discussion of a subject in speech or writing. Very often it is in writing. Or it can be linguistic, which means that it's any unit of connected speech or writing longer than a sentence. But here we focus on the second part of the definition. It's a formal discussion of a subject in speech or writing. So these concepts, discourse, ideologies, power, and language, all depend on each other. You find them expressed in law, how laws are phrased, in regulations and rules. What can we do? What can't we do? How is this described? It is in how we talk about groups of people. There you see our opinions, our values, our ideas about the world. It is evident in the choice of words. It becomes apparent in schools and textbooks if you start to analyze it. It is very apparent in politics, but also something that is present in film, in images, in any kind of text that you encounter, or any kind of speech situation. The sources for this lecture, which you do not have to read as students in high school level, are Fairclough, Forbjörn and Rorty. The images you have seen are all in the public domain, which means that they are free to use, unless otherwise specified. Thank you for your time.